Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm going to talk about how I keep a mixed community tank of cichlids, African and South and Central American cichlids. In the previous video I talked about why I do it and why I think it's okay, how and some of how and why I think it's safe and healthy for these fish. But now I'm going to talk about how and the real practical nuts and bolts of how I put tanks together, how I assemble a stock list or decide to add fish. So everything from filtration to scape to water parameters, etc. So starting with what I think is the most important thing for any cichlid community is your stock. So there are a few schools of thought on how to stock a cichlid community tank. I prescribe to the philosophy of overstocking. I prescribe to that for several reasons. One, I have done it many times and seen great success. And the main thought behind that is that the more fish you have, the more the aggression in the tank is spread across fish. If I had three cichlids in here, one might become the alpha and kill the other two, or kill one, and the other one just hide the whole time. Because there's so many fish in this tank, when one fish chases another fish, it gets distracted by a different fish, and then it gets distracted by a different fish. And there's just too many things going on for one fish to consistently attack another fish. Because part of what's the goal here in keeping a community tank of any kind of cichlids, but especially a mixed cichlid tank of Africans and South and Central Americans, is you are trying to create a habitat that's going to keep all these fish alive, of course. So again, keeping as many fish as you feel comfortable keeping, and that goes into filtration and tank size, of course. This is a 120-gallon tank. It's 5 feet by 18 inches by 2 feet tall. So it's a fairly big tank. Obviously, tanks get much larger than this. For some people, this tank might seem enormous. For some people, this tank might seem super small. I consider it a small to medium large tank, right? I remember when I first got my 55-gallon tank maybe 10 years ago and thinking that was, giant, right? And we all go through that, and I'm sure if I ever get a bigger tank than this, I'm going to think that tank is giant. When I got this tank, I thought this tank was giant, and now it's starting to feel pretty filled out, to be honest. So tank size is really crucial because this leads into one of my next topics, which is that I don't believe Mbuna should be in the conversation with a mixed cichlid tank. The only Mbuna that I personally sign off on are yellow labs and yellowtail acais. And that's because they are extremely docile for an Mbuna and therefore play well with others. All other Mbuna, not only are they super aggressive, but they're also mostly vegetarian, which really contrasts peacocks, haps, and most Central and South Americans, which are often predators and carnivorous. So I take Mbuna right off of there. So as far as stocking, the other thing is on the South and Central American side is you have to avoid the very large species, right? You want to have a mix of fish that all are going to be about the same size once they're fully grown. So there is one fish in here that I know is going to be a problem, and I will rehome because I'm not going to buy a tank that's specifically for it. I've just decided right now. Who knows, that may change, but that's my thought right now. And that is, I have a small 3-inch jaguar cichlid in here. It's currently hiding, which is a good sign. If you know anything about a jaguar cichlid, they get between 14 to 24 inches long. They have teeth, and they're considered one of the most aggressive, hard to keep South American, Central American cichlids with other fish. And there's good reason for that. The other large ones are dove eyes, other types, yellow jackets. There's a few other umbis, black nasties. There's a few very large South and Central American cichlids that I personally would not advise trying to keep in a community tank. If you're really ballsy and have a lot of cash laying around, you could try to do it, and you could try to keep some of the largest haps with some of the largest South American and Central American. Like if you kept all the Parachromis with all the, the Venustus and the Nimbochromis, right? So it's the Venustus, it's the VC10s, the Fuscos. You know, if you felt like you could handle the risk of mixing those with Jags and Dovies and Black Nasties and Midas and Red Devils and put them all in a big tank, like, more power to you. So with the, again, to recap there, the Africans, you want to avoid the smallest ones, or the Mbunas. They're the most aggressive and they're vegetarians in terms of feeding. That's just a nightmare. And then on the South and Central Americans, you want to avoid the largest. So those are the Red Devils. I don't say Oscars, because Oscars, in my opinion, again, every fish has its own personality. So you could get, you know, a jaguar that fits. It's possible. Or a type of Mbuna that's typically really aggressive that fits. You never know. It could be a one-off. But typically, we know that these fish are dangerous to keep with other fish. For you know, there's many examples of this. But I don't. I would consider an Oscar. I think they get a little too big for me. But I would, if I had a larger tank, I wouldn't be afraid of putting an Oscar with this tank once all these fish were fully grown and that Oscar was appropriate size, because Oscars grow very quickly and they will eat other fish for sure. So other than that, yeah, I think, you know, I think for me it's like, when I think of Central Americans, I tap out in terms of size around green tears, Jack Dempsey's, maybe Carpetinas, Texas cichlids, right? Anything that's going to be 12 and below. You know, an Oscar can get 14, 16 inches, so they can get quite large. Jags, again, 16 to 24. Dovies, you know, they can get 3 feet. I mean, those things are monsters. So, so when I think of Central Americans, I'm thinking, you know, green tears, Jack Dempsey's, Texas, Carpentinas, Firemouth, Convicts, Salvinis, you know, the list goes on. And then with the Africans, it's the peacocks and haps. And there's a couple oddballs. Like I have right here is an African jewel. And this fish is, some people think these fish are the meanest fish in the world. They're really not that bad, in my opinion, in my experience. Again, in a large tank, in a community. Any one of these fish, if you had one of these fish with another one fish, they would fight for a hierarchy and they would kill each other. So it's about creating a high stock. So overcrowding, overpopulating is always to your benefit. Again, I also think it's just more fun and beautiful to have a diverse number of fish. And that leads me into filtration. So you always, no matter what you're doing with fish keeping, is you want to have extremely adequate filtration. This is a 120-gallon tank. I have 500 gallons of filtration on this. And you can see my water quality is pretty dang good. And I have four sponge filters that are each rated at 125 gallons. And I find that to be perfectly adequate. I've never had issues with that. Sponge filters are my favorite. I'll make another video about sponge filters versus the world. I really think they are the absolute best option every time, unless you're doing super, super large tanks. But yeah, so adequate filtration, especially cichlids are heavy eaters and they are dirty fish in the sense they poop a ton. They are waste machines. So you got to do weekly water changes. I do weekly of 20 to 50%, and I have my filters you know, on point in terms of what they're turning the water at. Some other important things in terms of the how to do this is you can tell I have quite a bit of hiding spots. And I just added 3 fish today, so they're a little bit riled up. Anytime you add fish, you're going to have extra aggression because they're going to reform the hierarchy in some shape or form. And what I typically do, which I did not do today, which I will do tomorrow, is I typically rescape my aquarium every time I add any fish. And that's to break up the territories. It really helps break up the hierarchy. It kind of resets everyone. Everyone starts at kind of ground zero, and then they get to find their natural order the next day. So rescaping is really important. I rescape literally every water change a little tiny bit. I don't do giant rescapes. I basically just move what I have in here around in different configurations, which is nice because it looks like a fresh new tank every week, and it really helps with their aggression. Another main point that I find very useful is to make sure you're adequately feeding these fish. You know, there's a huge theory, not theory, it's definitely, I agree with it. You know, it's a school of thought, you never overfeed your fish, right? And there's several reasons for that. Obviously, it's dangerous for the fish because Ooh, look, this jag and this, these two have been going at it for the top spot. So there's a prime example of keeping a mixed tank. You got a Jack Dempsey and a Madagascar cichlid. And one of the things that you may notice when you keep these fish right in this moment is that fish that look similar, even if they're different species from different continents, they will feel threatened, as if, you know, they feel like they have to show, I'm the better black fish with white spots, you know. So and that's why I think the Madagascar cichlid has also been chasing that flower horn. They look somewhat similar. So, you know, this is classic behavior, and this is something that you have to be more vigilant with when you are keeping a mixed tank. Is you have to keep an eye on things like you wouldn't in other tanks. But honestly, like I said in my last video, if I just had Central and South American fish in here, you have to do the same thing. They're going to create a hierarchy, and if you're not paying attention, sometimes a fish is going to get killed. And that's the same with a peacock and half tank. It doesn't matter if they're all from the same lake. They're going to create a hierarchy. There's going to be a tank boss, and if you're not paying attention, sometimes you can lose a fish. So it's not unique to a mixed tank to have aggression, to have disputes, especially, you know, again, I just added that fire mouth. I just added the green terror, and there's a very large Chinese algae eater in there now as well. So, but yeah, having these hiding spots is a prime example, right? So you need to be able to give your fish a place to go when things get heated. If this was a bare tank with no decor, no plants, no rocks, you know, as we just saw that Jack Dempsey and the Madagascar go at it, if whoever was kind of winning that fight, if there's nowhere to go for the other fish, then you have to stop that fight. You have to remove the fish, because it's just going to keep attacking. When you have lots of hiding spots, lots of breaks of sight, right? Those fish might be, you know, a foot from each other and not even know it, because one might be on one side of the plant, one might be on the other side of the plant. So if you break up the lines of sight, you have lots of hiding places, that allows for disputes to die down a lot sooner. And again, like I was mentioning with overstocking, as soon as those fish start to go at it, another fish might step in, or one of those fish gets distracted, and the fight's over. So those are my main tips. You know, it's keeping your stock high. It's keeping no imbunas, no super large Central and South Americans, feeding adequately. I think that's what I was talking about when those two went at it. So let me just finish that thought. You know, that people say you should not underfeed fish, or you should never overfeed fish, excuse me, which I totally agree with. But you also, it's very important with a cichlid community, is you don't want to underfeed. So you have to find that sweet spot where you're really paying attention when you're feeding. Are they eating all the food? And you want to feed more than less, because if these fish are hungry, they will find food and they will eat each other one way or the other. So keeping those bellies full is super important, you know, because they're already going to have some level of aggression in the tank. If they have aggression with hunger, then you can have way more issues than you really need to. So you have the no imbunas, the no large South and Central Americans, finding that right balance of food where you're not overfeeding, but you're definitely not underfeeding, having lots of hiding spots, and you have as big a tank as you can afford or keep in your home. And then, of course, the filtration to go with it. And then keeping your parameters stable, as I mentioned, and why I think it's safe. So if you have any questions about this, any concerns, comments, again, I got a jag in here. I know I'm going to have to rehome that. Other than that, I am not concerned about the longevity of any of these other fish. But if a real issue does arise, that's part of paying attention as aquarists. You can rehome a fish, you can redistribute to another tank. You can find a way to find a balance if you're committed to it, and that's what you want to do. So I appreciate you watching, and see you in the next video. All right, thanks so much. Take care.